Howdy, I'm Jammer. So, before we begin, as always, please remember that I have started a Patreon account. It'll be in the description section below in my link tree. Just click that link. It'll take you to my website, my Instagram, my blog, more YouTube, or the Patreon itself, where there is a $1 tier donation. $1 a month, every month helps me, afford food and rent, and, occasionally comics. So, if you like the channel, if you like me, and you want to help me out, $1 a month, much appreciated. So, as you can see, I have donned my rainbow glasses once again. One, because when I'm recording this, it's June. June is Pride Month, and I'm a queer man, so, gotta gay it up. But at the same time, we're doing it because, light refracted creates the visible color spectrum in the form of a rainbow. And when we're talking about colors and light and comics, what else could it possibly be but Green Lantern? But actually not Green Lantern. Today's video is actually not going to be about specifically Green Lantern, and before you say anything, it's not about Larfleeze either. We will get to Larfleeze because he's my favorite character in the DC universe, followed very closely by Darkseid. But we're not talking about Larfleeze yet. We're talking about another villain in the Green Lantern universe. Today's video is going to be about Sinestro, Vol.1, The Demon Within. Now, I had no intention of ever reading this book. Again, when COVID-19 happened in the year 2020 and we all got that stimulus check from the government and we were all told to, hey, stay at home for close to about 2 months, I did what a lot of people did. I did an impulse buy. And my impulse buy did not go through Amazon. It instead went through my hometown comic book shop, Ground Zero Comics. I went through their website, their online website at the time, and I looked and I found this, and I thought, Sinestro has his own comic? Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, Loki has his own comic. Hannibal got his own spin-off show, so yeah, that makes sense. Sinestro is the de facto villain of the Green Lantern universe. Or maybe another way of saying it is he's usually been thrown out. Again, when we're talking about the Green Lantern universe, this is a decades-long universe, and the fact that Green Lantern has existed since the golden age of comics. But Sinestro has really only existed in relation to Hal Jordan, the main Green Lantern, at least in terms of recent memory. There's all this fun stuff relating to the original Green Lantern and Infinite Universes, but I'm not getting into that today. The point is, I bought Sinestro, and I read it, and I thought, this is actually pretty good. Because again, when we talk about villains in superhero comics getting their own books, oftentimes it tends to be these nice little one-shots that are interesting but don't necessarily do much, if anything, in terms of understanding the complexity of a character, their motivations, what have you. And this book, while being, again, a pretty typical superhero popcorn book, managed to do a lot of really interesting things visually and formally, and so I thought, you know what? I think it's worth talking about for the channel. So, when we're talking about Sinestro Vol.1, again, we're principally talking about the New 52, so we're talking about that kind of like late 2000s period when DC got a nice big sort of they completely revolutionized their line and restarted everything. And in terms of where Sinestro Vol.1 picks up, it takes place right after Green Lantern Volume 3, The End by Jeff Johns, a book which we have covered on this channel before. Go check out that video. I hope you'll like it, and I hope you'll like this book. And then, one last little thing before we go into the main hurrah. I just want to point out that the main author of this work is Cullen Bunn, an artist that I'm a really big fan of. He did Deadpool Illustrated, the only Marvel book that I would ever recommend to just about anybody. But then alongside that, he did a couple of other books that I'll make sure to put up here next to me while I'm doing the talking. And then, of course, as well, you have I believe it's pronounced Matt Kint. It might be Matt Kint. If somebody could please in the comment section below tell me how you actually pronounce it, I'd be very appreciative. And then please pause your screen for a moment and look at all these wonderful people who did the lettering and did the inking. Again, when we're talking about superhero comics, especially DC comics, this is a multi-part project, meaning there's going to be one person who's doing the writing, somebody who's doing the drawing, the inking, the coloring, the editing, all this stuff. It is a big deal. And so please, 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 don't just think that Cullen Bunn is the only person making this comic. It's a multi-part effort. So please, give these people some love. They're worth your time. So, Sinestro, Volume 1, The Demon Within. Let's talk about why I think this comic book is really interesting and why I think you should give it a try. All right, so narratively, what is the first volume of Sinestro exactly about? Well, it's important to recognize, again, that because this is a DC graphic novel, this is not, for the most part, a prestige book, or meaning that this is not a one-shot story that was originally sold or produced as a single story. This was an ongoing series, which means this book is what's known as a bound trade. So this one will effectively collect Sinestro numbers 1 through 5, and then Green Lantern 23.4 and Sinestro Future's End number 1. So you actually have several stories in it. The main story is Sinestro issues 1 through 5, but then you've got a couple of extra supplemental materials, and then DC is trying to do what a lot of comic book companies do these days, which is put in a kind of like behind-the-scenes stuff. They give you some nice little illustrations by the artists and showing them various characters that appear throughout the story. And then, of course, you also get some nice variant covers scattered here, kind of throughout. So that's always cool, and I really appreciate it. But the main storyline of Sinestro is issues number 1 through 5. The main story follows Sinestro following the events of Green Lantern Volume 3, The End. This, of course, was the big, epic, spiraling battle with the First Lantern and the Lost Army series. It was a massive, massive event in the DC universe. And I'm trying to find, like, the actual page to show you. This was huge, and just virtually every book in the Green Lantern universe, from the Red Lantern comics, the Orange Lantern comics, what have you, was impacted and participated in this event. After the story finished, Cullen Bunn was given the opportunity to be like, okay, well, what happened to Sinestro afterwards? Because at the end of the last volume, he manages to sort of ingest, so to speak, this great demon Parallax, who is effectively the embodiment of fear in the universe. And again, when we talk about light in Green Lanterns, or lanterns period, each of the colors on the visible spectrum is a symbol for something. Green, of course, represents willpower, individual strength. Yellow means fear, and Sinestro, throughout the entirety of his run, has largely been a Yellow Lantern. Now, he's a fun, interesting villain because at one point he was a Green Lantern, but for that you should go back and read some of the earlier issues. Narratively speaking, the book picks up there and then manages to sort of tell an interesting story because one of his followers, a woman by the name of Lissa Drack, feels that Sinestro's legacy has been kind of forever tainted, and she realizes, no, the Yellow Lanterns need to come back, they need to be a force unto themselves, I need to find Sinestro. She eventually discovers Sinestro living off of this world by himself. He seems to have abandoned his yellow ring, and then along with that, there appear to be, let's see, a new movement on the horizon. Beings from seemingly another dimension who are dedicated to eliminating color or colored light from the universe, meaning that they're attempting to remove all forms of emotion from the universe and establish a kind of monotone quality to the universe. Basically, no more fear, no more anger, no more greed, no more willpower, no more anything. Obviously, this is a threat to just the universe overall because emotions are one of the ways that we sort of define ourselves as a species and the way we define our humanity, and also because it's a superhero book. You need some huge intergalactic conflict that's going to destroy everything. Well, she eventually finds Sinestro, and he realizes, oh, the Yellow Lanterns are not doing what I told them to do, and so I need to go back and whip them into shape. After this, he manages to get his Yellow Lanterns together, and along with that, he discovers that though in Volume 3 of Green Lantern, his home planet of Korugar had been destroyed, several individual citizens of his planet still survive, and so he finds a reason to don the yellow ring again and save his people. The story of Sinestro in Volume 1 is really of him trying to find the Koruganians? Koruganites? one of those words, his people, and find them a new home. And so the story basically follows the arc of him trying to reestablish just the very base of his operation of the Yellow Lanterns, while also encountering his daughter Soranik, who's a Green Lantern. And of course, there's the sort of dramatic tension of, oh, Dad, you're an evil bastard, and I hate you. And it's like, daughter, I love you, please love me, and all that stuff. Again, it's a superhero book. This is a melodrama with tights. If that sounds like I'm being pejorative, I promise it's not. I love this stuff. It's fun, but you know, it is what it is. It's a melodrama. It's a fun melodrama, but a melodrama nonetheless. Still, looking at this first volume, again, it doesn't seem like there's much to talk about in terms of comics. And when it comes to this channel, I try to make sure that the comics I'm talking about are ones that are, worth people's time because they offer something about the medium. Well, the thing about this first volume is that Cullen Bunn is a great writer, and he does a really solid job. But the artists on this book, Dave Eaglesham, Rags Morales, Igor Lima, and Roy Jose, managed to do some really interesting things visually. For instance, if you look at Lissa Drack while she's kind of narrating the story of Sinestro in the opening pages, you have this beautiful frame structure around the story itself. We get these kind of hexagonal or diagonal fracted or just shattered panels sort of going throughout page by page of this early story. And Sinestro's journey seems like it's some sort of, I don't know properly how to describe it, almost kind of like biomechanized illuminated manuscript. These are gorgeous opening pages, and it's something that I wasn't necessarily expecting from what is, in effect, a kind of offshoot story from the main Green Lantern universe. Again, a lot of production values go into the Green Lantern comics because they're Green Lantern. When it comes to the other lanterns, and I'll talk about this when I eventually get into Larfleeze or the Red Lanterns or some of the other Green Lantern stories, not as much attention or production value seems to go into it. And so one of the things I really like is you can see that there's a lot of art and gorgeous detail going into the composition and layout of these pages. Now, it's not even just that opening act either. If we look at a later passage when Lissa Drack and Sinestro are approaching a space station who apparently are being operated by slavers who have some of the Koroganites, words, Sinestro's people, we have a stunning full-page panel, and you can really look at this. You have the space station right here, right? But pull back, really pull back, and just look at this page. You have the circle right here near the bottom of the page, not even in the center, near the bottom, and it's divided 4 ways in this kind of slanted line. So rather than create a grid-like pattern, you have this bizarre open space concept and very fluid lines creating these sort of small spaces where we see the details of the space station. Again, you could have just put the space station in a big rectangle and then put each of these little bits of the space station in smaller rectangles on the page with, a solid white background around the panels. But instead, you place the figures within space, and then you just create this circle right in the middle. It doesn't necessarily give anything to the plot, but visually it's a way of disrupting or creating a flow within the reader. It creates something it creates something that's stunning visually, and the reader is sort of taken aback to be like, wow, I feel like I'm in the depths of space because look at those nebulas, look at those stars. And especially with something like a space station, you're talking about something that's effectively just a big hunk of metals and pipes, but this circle right down here in the middle gives us a sense of energy, or it just creates a new way of experiencing the images that are contained within the panels. I talk a lot about panel layouts on this channel, but it's important because, again, if you remember Understanding Comics, the panels is where everything happens. If you look at this page, what effectively has happened is you have gutters here. You have this one round circular gutter, and then these little 4 gutters here that are separating time and space, we're perceiving Sinestro looking at the station and then looking at the details of the station. So it's taking place, or the closure is happening in this really unorthodox strategy. Again, it's something that is kind of easy to miss. And again, especially when we're talking about like a supervillain graphic novel, oftentimes this much attention is not necessarily paid to it. But what I like about this book is that there's lots of little details like that where you can see that, yes, you could have just created just a bunch of squares on the page, but instead you chose to do something a little different. And perhaps another beautiful example of this is later on when Lyssa Drac and Sinestro encounter the Yellow Lanterns, who aren't too happy to see Sinestro because, well, they feel that he's abandoned them and they've had to basically start off on their own and find a new identity. And when Sinestro suddenly shows up and is like, I am your leader again, they're like, no, I'm going to fight you. Again, it's a superhero book, so naturally, a fight scene like this is going to be usually broken up into a couple of horizontal patterns, maybe a couple of like vertical panels as well, right? Instead, you get this gorgeous two-page spread, and I would really encourage you to pause the screen for a moment and drink this in, because not only is there a lot of dynamic energy at play here in terms of showing physical action using the rays of light as well as these ricochet effects, but then also, too, the layout for this is a two-page scroll, and really, right there, you can see a real concern and depth with creating a tattered effect to this paper, as well as showing the shadow effects within. This blew my mind when I was reading the book, and I was like, wow. Like, y'all know you're doing a Sinestro book, right? You don't have to, you're going to go this far, this much detail? Hey, cool, great. This is great. I wish more mainstream comics would try to go to this level of effort. Just looking at this page, again, the frame of the panel is entirely put within this scroll. And this is something that I really haven't seen in just about any other comic except maybe, with one noted example, Sandman Overture by Neil Gaiman and J.H. Williams III and Dave Stewart. This book, when I complete my Sandman series, and I promise I am working on that, but this book is visually radiant, and I can't talk enough about it. There are choices and decisions in terms of panel layouts and construction that are really stunning and beautiful. And Sinestro manages to do something, at least in my mind, just as interesting. Because again, a fight scene is usually something that takes a couple of pages, but in here they chose to use two pages and managed to place it within this really interesting frame to create a new narrative effect. Sinestro's story feels like it's being kind of like unraveled to the reader over time. Now, part of this is because Lyssa Drac has a lot of kind of like internal monologues that she's sort of delivering to the viewer, and Sinestro delivers some as well. So we kind of feel that the events that we're watching in question are not necessarily being done by an omniscient narrator, but there is a kind of, dare I say, oral quality to it. We feel like Sinestro and Lyssa Drac are narrating these stories to us as they're actually happening. And so, tonally speaking, that two-page spread is really good at continuing that. Now, the very next page is a little bit more typical in terms of superhero fights, and especially like lantern superhero fights. There's a lot of hands with rings pointing at other people and light just kind of shining out, and you see a lot of these sort of jumbled up panels where people are hopping back and forth in the middle of the fight, and oh my gosh, it's so dramatic and cool because superheroes and yellow lanterns, and oh my god, these guys are so cool. Yeah, it's a superhero book, and it follows that. But nevertheless, even on a more sort of traditional panel layout, you can see there's a lot of concern with taking a new approach to just sort of laying out a bunch of squares. This page in particular is really interesting for the way that you have, you'll note here, a very horizontal approach. We are moving the eye left to right, up to down, whereas with this page here, This panel kind of juts out diagonally, and so all the panels that follow suit have to follow this exact same pattern. It's a kind of jarring effect on the eye, and it again sort of heightens the dramatic tension of Sinestro's journey as he's confronting his yellow lanterns. It's pretty dope, actually. Now, looking at a later scene, again, just another example of why I think Sinestro is kind of interesting. Because, it's Sinestro, Hal Jordan has to make an appearance. It's just a fact. It's one of those things. It's just going to happen, okay? It's like if Lex Luthor is in a movie, Superman's going to show up at some point. Likewise, if Joker's in a movie or a book, Batman's got to be there in some form or capacity. Like, it's just a thing. So naturally, Hal Jordan shows up and is all like, "Hey, what are you doing? You're supposed to be a bad guy. Did you kill one of the Guardians?" And he's like, "Yeah, I killed one of the Guardians." Like, you knew about that. And anyway, you can read the book and find out all that fun details, because it is fun. But Sinestro has one of these moments where it's like, "Oh, I'm actually a lot tougher than you." And Hal Jordan's like, "Yeah, whatever. I'm going to beat you." And Sinestro's like, "No, I don't think you will." And he basically throws the full might of Parallax, the demon of fear, at him, while also throwing his yellow lanterns at him. Again, this is an interesting page for, one, the dramatic effects that are taking place. Sinestro is confronting Hal Jordan for the first time after the whole First Lantern saga and everything that we saw in this book. But then at the same time, visually speaking, this page is really interesting. Or excuse me, these pages are really interesting because the reader has to, please forgive my awkwardness here, the reader has to read this top panel and then slowly work their way down. So, technically speaking, their eyes originally moved from this page over to this page and then had to bounce back into this semicircular pattern, which is going to lead us back to where we eventually ended. It's a kind of circular effect visually on the eye, and it's kind of interesting when connected or when set against what's happening in the narrative. Again, Hal Jordan is being attacked, and Hal Jordan is the superhero. He's the person that we're supposed to identify with or care about. Now, Hal Jordan is actually kind of a dick, and I'm honestly more of a John Stewart fan myself. No apologies here. But nevertheless, the Green Lantern in this universe is supposed to be the figure that the reader is supposed to sympathize with. But what's interesting is that at this moment, this scene is presented so that Hal isn't really so much the issue. What's happening, really, that we need to pay attention to is Sinestro interacting with his daughter, Soranik, who's like, "No, don't kill him. He's your friend. He's a former ally, and he's done nothing to you. He does not deserve this." And so, ultimately, Sinestro listens to his daughter and offers Hal Jordan mercy. It's a little thing. But narratively speaking, it's a way that the character of Sinestro becomes more than just this dude who thinks he knows everything and in fact does know everything, just trying to prove how big and tough and bad he is. Because especially when we're talking about the narratives of villains, the pitfall that writers and artists can fall into is this person is purely bad. This person has no good qualities whatsoever, or at the very least, he's not going to do anything, or he's not going to be challenged. The fact that he's challenged by his daughter, and the fact that he's willing to offer Hal Jordan mercy in this moment, is a testament to the fact that he's not necessarily becoming a better person, but he is not without reason, and he's not without even the most basest form of empathy. Sinestro's motivations are really interesting. And again, formally speaking, the elements that are being employed on this page is another way to sort of show the reader that Sinestro is kind of undergoing an arc, because while he is willing to throw all of his energy into one place, but after listening to his daughter, he's able to pull back, reconsider what his actions are, so that much like a circle, he begins effectively where he ended. And again, this is a Sinestro book. This is a DC supervillain book. Something like this was probably not sold or designed in a corporate boardroom to be something with this level of depth or this much artistry. But, hey, it worked out. And Sinestro, visually speaking, is probably one of the most interesting Green Lantern books, formally, that I've ever read. And so I would encourage everybody reading at home, take the time to read this book because it's worth your time. And so, with those examples out of the way, let's do the last hurrah and then call it a day. Okay, so yeah, Sinestro, Volume 1, The Demon Within. It's really good. I didn't honestly see this coming. I thought this was just going to be some Green Lantern book that's kind of connected to the Green Lantern universe and was mostly designed to sell a couple copies and issues, but I was really surprised and really thrilled and charmed to discover that this book has a lot of interesting creative decisions behind it that, at least in my opinion, are a great example of what comics can and should be. Rather than, again, just throwing in a lot of dudes and chicks in tight outfits throwing light beams at each other through space, this book manages to tell a really interesting story about a man's individual chance at redemption, and at the same time manages to use the form of comics in a really important and, in my estimation, really interesting and visual fashion. It's by playing with the panel layouts and matching those panel layouts with the narrative elements in play, you're able to perform a lot of interesting rhetorical functions in this story. And then, of course, just visually speaking, this book is beautiful from the start. It's stunningly drawn. The characters have so much life and energy to them. And this book is just like any Green Lantern book, really beautiful to look at. So, if I haven't convinced you by now, I really don't think anything else will. Sinestro Volume 1, The Demon Within, is a great book. I can't wait to find the second volume trade, or maybe I'll try to start collecting some of the individual issues. But whatever the case, Sinestro is a great DC book. It's just a fun book to read, period. And anybody who likes comics, wants to make comics, or even just likes reading comics, really should try this one out. Because even if superhero books aren't your thing, there's still enough interesting visual structures in this story to keep you entertained. All right, I'm going to call it a day there. Whew. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I tremendously appreciate it. Please like, share, and subscribe, all that claptrap. It lets me know you like this and that you want to keep seeing more. Please remember as well, like I said at the start, in the description section below, there is a link to my link tree, and in that link tree you will find my blog, my Instagram, my website, my YouTube channel. Of course, you're probably already here already. And then, of course, my Patreon account. I have a $1 tier donation. That's it. If you donate me $1 a month or even just $1 one time, I'll be immensely appreciative. And hey, maybe I'll read your name out on the video because, you're worth it. When it comes to Sinestro Volume 1, like I said, this is a bound trade, so you might start off looking at your local comic book shop and check out their graphic novel section to see if they have it. But also, like I noted here before, this is a bound trade, so it's a collection of individual issues. Most comic book shops, in fact, all comic book shops, have an old issue bin section. It's literally just row after row of boxes filled with single issues, usually wrapped in plastic. Check it out. Chances are you may be able to find, if not the entire series, at least a couple episodes of this run, and who knows, maybe you'll decide to go to other comic book shops and check out their single bins. Whatever the case, this book is definitely worth it. So check your local comic book shop first. If they don't have it, try your local public library, because most libraries these days are trying to expand outwards, and a lot of them now have graphic novel and manga sections. So check it out, and if they don't have it, ask for an interlibrary loan form, and they should be able to get it to you. And, as always, thank you so much for watching. I tremendously appreciate it. Go read some comics.